Well, I don't think, I mean, in a way, I write under a pseudonym, but when I started writing, it was more of a character that I created. Maybe that's what a pseudonym is for everyone. But it was a character that I imagined was writing a book. And somehow I cut out the parts where I was describing him writing a book, and this character just sort of took over, and he was the one who was producing the book, and I cut out anything else around it. The reason I did that is because I was deeply... I guess there was two reasons. I was possibly going to get sued, I thought, possibly, by a prime minister who was not unlitigious in her 9 years in power. The book was called On the Conditions and Possibilities of Helen Clark Taking Me as Her Young Lover. And I don't think... I ran it past a lawyer friend of mine. I don't think it was defamatory, but it was a little crude in places. And I don't think it was mean, but I've learned in the interceding years that you probably need to take a little more caution when you're dealing with real people. And I've given myself that ability to be cautious by writing under the name Richard Meros. And I think that will be something that sort of flakes away from my skin in the next few years, or maybe it'll be something that I keep on. I don't know, I was reading quite a bit of Kierkegaard at the time, and he had an impressive take on it, and I think it's quite a repeated idea that the pseudonym allows the reader to stay away from trying to link up autobiographical moments in the author's life with the meaning that comes across in the book. And I feel like that sort of connects into a lot of what Oscar Wilde had to say about art, and about art not being this moral compass where you produce something that is supposed to tell people how to live their life, but it's supposed to be a representation of what is or what could be. And so in a way, I'm using a pseudonym, and I think pseudonyms are very useful, to keep away from that idea that I'm saying that what I write is good and should be. It just is, or isn't, or could be. The physical landscape of New Zealand. It's fantastic. I love the pine trees. I love to love the pine trees. I did grow up in a rural area, which I've lied about quite a few times in the past, but I'm quite happy to put it on record now that I did grow up on a farm with sheep and deer, mother, father, brother, that kind of stuff. And I have travelled a lot overseas as well, and I've seen beautiful non-New Zealand landscapes. But I always feel this draw of going back to New Zealand. I'd like to not feel it. I'd love to head off on a trip overseas and just scrap everything, sell all the books, sell the music, sell the sheets, get rid of my clothes, and just take off forever. But I'm always drawn home. It's the only place I can really be comfortable in the long term. And yet I hate the place, and it hates me, and we don't get along. It's family, I suppose. And that comes through in my writing. I write about stupid New Zealand topics. One of the most quoted lines in the Helen Clark book was a phrase called the erotic zen of Ken Shirley. The erotic zen of Ken Shirley. And no one even in New Zealand knows who Ken Shirley is. He was like a backbench MP for the ACT party, which is a far-right sort of pseudo-libertarian party, but they never actually have the guts to say any libertarian policies. So I guess I like to be difficult in putting in concepts, because you read a book sometimes and there's so much in it that you don't understand, or you don't even know that you don't understand it, or even a word you can bypass and not understand. And so I like to consciously put in something that makes people not feel at home. Maybe I should make people feel at home. But people who do get it do enjoy Ken Shirley and a reference to Ken Shirley and the possibility that there is an erotic zen of Ken Shirley. We lie all the time about sales figures, and we usually under-report them. I think we said we'd sold 16 copies at one stage. It's just, it's just so great to see what the media will report and what people will believe. Like, for example, New Zealand's anti-spamming law came in I think 2007, and I sent out a press release to claim the title of the last spammer. And they believed all the stuff that I was telling them. They didn't fact check on anything. I guess it's a function of the media no longer having any money to actually do any checking or editing. It's just a great space to be able to play with. We do sell quite a few books, but the collective is an operation of friends and then new friends coming together to produce books in an unalienated fashion, to make them ourselves. We hand bind them ourselves, and we make sure that the authors are involved in that process. I think it reflects in the quality of the book and the feel of the book. Try and get our authors together to spend time with the designers. I think in New Zealand, and probably in Australia, the concept of DIY is really important and really accepted by a lot of people, that if you do it yourself, then you've got an intimate relationship with the things that you're going to live with. And yet it seems like it's only... I mean, sure, there's people making zines and doing DIY music, but in terms of books, it seems like authors seem so far apart from the actual product. It's almost like they want to be away from the book itself. They want it to turn up and no work to go into the production of it. They want it to be like a Christmas gift that they sent 4 or 5 copies by the publisher. Well, with Lawrence and Gibson, there's some good jokes that go around that they are books that no one else would publish. And in a way, maybe they are books that no one else would publish, or at least at the start, perhaps they were so silly and off-kilter that maybe people would have published. We don't know how, I don't know. But we did have a very strong, like, for example, my first book and some of the other people's first books, we didn't bother to send them to a traditional publisher. That wasn't the point. The point was to create something ourselves at the start, using just a pot of glue and a paintbrush, and to sort of break down that barrier between the book as this fetishized object that you get from a bookstore and the author is some sort of god who has produced it. Well, we wanted to make something with our hands, do it all ourselves, and really feel that process and have the feel of that process sort of roll back into the creation of the books. And so now often the Lawrence and Gibson Publishing Collective or Cooperative or Autocracy or whatever we call it on any given day is featured in the books themselves. They take a starring role, as does Richard Meros as a character, as well as the author. And the same goes for some of other writers in the collective. I guess I'm kind of a neurotic guy, and I like to read books and things online. I like to read a whole book, and I like to reflect on that stuff. And I really don't know how my writing came to be as it was. It's probably what happens when you leave a university and you've been writing, you've been taught to write in a particular way for a number of years, and you're also not allowed to really write. Although I had some really awesome lecturers who gave me a lot of their time, whose time I took a lot of, and they did allow me to sort of start writing. And I didn't do any creative writing masters or undergrad. I guess you can do undergrads in it these days. You can do doctorates. And so I think it was just like a sputtering and a jocular attempt to have a bit of fun and a bit of an attempt to say absolutely everything. Like with the book On the Conditions and Possibilities of Helen Clark Taking Me as Her Young Lover, the whole idea of that book was to choose a topic that the creation of a book on it would fulfill something to do with a hypothesis of it. So the idea with that book is the writing of a book, or even the consideration of the conditions and possibilities of Helen Clark Taking Me as Her Young Lover, would create the conditions in themselves for that to possibly happen. And it's true. Obviously it's ridiculous. She's not going to take me as a young lover. But she's more likely to take me now because I wrote this book than she would have if I hadn't ever considered this thing. And I think of this often in terms of of Marx and Marxism. If Marx had in his idea what Marxism could be, and the way that the response of capital to Marxism and to Marxist ideas and ways to undermine it and to undermine workers and their unity, whether that ever entered his mind, whether he was ever fearful of the role of Marxism in stopping other parts of Marxism, other parts of communism. And that's what really sort of fascinated me by him. And just the ability of an author to be aware of the effect of what he creates, and whether there is a space within the text itself for a reflection on what the book might do in the wider public, and how that might sort of spiral into something that is undecidable, I guess. Beggars and Choosers, at the time it was published, was a complete written correspondence between myself and Creative New Zealand, myself being Richard Meros. It was volume 1, but there had only been one letter, and that letter was the draft of the manuscript which was sent to them. So the manuscript was the letter, but the manuscript was comprised of 8 applications to Creative New Zealand. Just after that draft of the manuscript was sent to them, thereby completing the first volume, I made the 8 applications at once to Creative New Zealand, New Zealand's art funding body, and asked them to fund the 8 books in the forthcoming cycle. So, and then the last application, I really shouldn't give it away. Should I give it away?
Why don't we give it away?
It's still a good
right
book.
To retract it.
Yeah, I don't mind giving it away. I think the book holds its own as it is, but the last application in Beggars and Choosers, which is the first volume in a multiple volume series of correspondence between myself and Creative New Zealand, is an application for funding for a book called Beggars and Choosers, the complete written correspondence between Richard Meros and Creative New Zealand, Volume 1. And so there I recognise that a lot of the time, it actually came from Kraus, who's a writer and an editor in the United States looking at art. And a lot of the time, she noticed that she had become this professional arts funding applicant. She was never getting funding for anything, but all her artwork, all her writing was based on these applications that went nowhere. And so I kind of liked the idea that maybe someone was actually creating a book, or in her case, creating a persona of this person, and that there was something productive in that as well, and maybe something even interesting or valuable. I mean, I pick up a lot of bits of paper on the street. Anything written on a wall I read, and sometimes it's written about me and it's quite mean. That was high school, university, and post-university. But I still find it fascinating. There was someone who said once that anything that's written on the wall is true. I guess that's saying, anything that is written by the people who aren't in power, who have to resort to writing on the wall to be heard, is probably saying something which is true, which is obviously not true. But I like the idea of it, and that's kind of the kind of scribbling around administration that Beggars and Choosers likes to play with. I guess there are a lot of concepts that have come up in the last 50 years from French philosophy, particularly to do with power and authority and knowledge. And I'm pretty sure someone somewhere has written about the concept of administration, to what it is to administer something, and the kind of power that an administrator has. And it's really a remarkable kind of power. I mean, I don't dislike Creative New Zealand, and I don't dislike any of these places. I find them interesting and productive spaces. I don't write about them because I'm angry that they are giving out money. I think it's great that they give out money. I think it's fantastic, but I'm not interested in their money. Well, I am, but I'm not interested in their money primarily. I'm interested in their practice and as the people who are administrators there, who make the decisions, who cycle through these processes and the thoughts that those processes create. I don't really do a lot of that work. I find it really interesting what it is, what qualifies someone. I mean, people ask writers, why do you write these words? What makes you a writer? Well, I'm interested in what makes someone an expert in administration. And I guess you can study these things as well, but I mean, there's probably, there should be Olympics for it. I'd love to see an Olympics of administrators. And not necessarily just bureaucracy, there's post-bureaucracy, there's all these forms of ways of making things come together and mesh and work and filing things and favouring some people on the side and not favouring people and forcing people to leave their jobs. It's just a fascinating world. Yeah, I guess I'm kind of an ascetic. I travel to cheap places that generally have good wine. I'm thinking Buenos Aires here. I'm thinking the former Soviet country and sovereign nation of Georgia. Syria, strangely enough, doesn't have good wine, but it's cheap because for some reason they don't tax it, or they don't seem to tax it. And I travel for about 6 months often without a computer, with a lot of notepads, and I write ideas in here that have probably been bubbling up at home, that have probably been in my mind, but I haven't had the space without my beautiful friends and lovely family. I need space from them to be able to jot things down and to create a coherent narrative. So I travel for a while, I travel overland, I travel by bus. I look at strange places, I get mugged and molested and the good things as well, I get fed. And then I generally stop in a hotel room. In Syria, I lived in the city of Aleppo in the north of Syria I was there for 4 months, and I spent the first month in a hotel room and wrote about 3 books in that time. I was in Iran before that for 2 weeks and wrote 1 book in that time. And this is just the skeleton. They're not edited down to anything, but it's this very intense moment where I drink far too much coffee, get up very early, and I'm just a train wreck in any other part of my life. And I write thousands of words every day. And I don't think it's that uncommon. I mean, people talk about, this book took me years and years to write. Well, yeah, I have a book that's finished now that took me maybe 5 years to write because I conceptualized it 5 years ago and I've been thinking about the ideas. But the actual process of writing, I think The Sorrows of Young Werther was written in 2 or 3 weeks. And Goethe basically said to his friends, hey, leave me alone. Don't get in touch with me. I'm writing a book. And I'm not very good at doing that, so I have to go overseas and I have to run away. But I am Goethe. Strike that. You can actually use that. You can use it and me going, strike that. Yeah. I'm not Goethe. But, I do like his writing. So yeah, being away, it's kind of that, it's about the relationship to New Zealand as well. I have a full life when I'm at home. I enjoy art and sports. I enjoy playing sports. I don't enjoy watching them, but playing basketball with Will and things like that. And it's a full life and it's a great life, but I like to write as well and I feel compelled to. And if I could be happy without writing, that would be a beautiful thing. And I would stay at home and play basketball all day and then do a bit of work here and there and just live a classic Kiwi life. But to write, I think you need space and to be living in a place where you don't even speak the language. I guess, it makes some really nice moments where you can't speak the language and people are really generous to you. In New Zealand, we're not hospitable to our tourists. They're just a source of money. God, our Prime Minister, John Key, once said that the cure for New Zealand's economic woes was for New Zealanders to invite one of their friends from overseas to New Zealand. That's not hospitality, that's disgusting. But overseas, in these places, say Syria, for example, they don't get a lot of tourists. Georgia gets a few, but they had that war a few years ago with Russia over South Ossetia, and that scared a lot of people off. And so people there, I guess, I'm sort of monopolizing their generosity. I don't mind doing that if they've got it to give, but there's some really beautiful moments where just, hell, you're buying bread or something, and people take an interest in you because you can't speak their language, or you try to speak it, and you say something silly to them and they laugh and smile and ask you to meet their family or give you a cup of tea, and it just makes me love humanity, and perhaps that feeds into the writing. Or maybe it's just 50 cents for falafel in Aleppo in Syria, beautiful falafel with all this tahini and stuff in it, and it's like 50 cents. Obviously it makes me terribly sad what's going on there at the moment, but hey, 50-cent falafel, cheap wine, and a cheap hotel room, and just some time to yourself. It's just a fantastic thing, and I recommend it to everyone. Richard Meros' Salutes the Southern Man was a book that I came up with in response to being away from New Zealand, and to do with the idea of the southern people of New Zealand as hard people. That is, their bodies were hard to the world, their minds were hard to other people. And when you're a New Zealander, you're often told to harden up. And sometimes they add another little sort of derogatory statement after that. But you must be hard to the world. And I was sort of in love with that concept of being hard to the world and contrasting that to what a softness might be like. And I thought, what is this hardness? How do we be hard? And how does that allow us to live an interesting life if we become hard? What does it give us to be hard? And what it gives us, basically, is the ability to be self-sufficient and not to have to live in a community. At the start of that book, I do this history of the use of the hedgehog as a metaphor, and in three beautiful books, or three beautiful passages, one by Schopenhauer. I think the first one was Schopenhauer, and he talks about how humans are like hedgehogs. And in winter, we have to huddle together to stay warm, but at the same time, we have all these quills, which I guess is our personality, and they bristle against one another. So humans can't get too close to one another because they'll poke each other with their personalities, their lives, their eccentricities. But at the same time, they need to sort of huddle together at this point which we've reached where we can tolerate each other. And it's kind of a miserable point to Schopenhauer as a hedgehog. This distance from people, but this need for them. And then Nietzsche borrowed that, and he made an offhand reference to hedgehogs. And I think Dostoevsky did the same thing. He had, in The Idiot, Prince Mishkin gives a hedgehog, or receives a hedgehog to his love. And she must have given it to him because she's hoping that he understands the symbolism of it all. And I sort of feel like the Southern man is able to be the hedgehog alone, is able to abandon the need for the heat of others and to let those quills, grow forth, to see where they go in his body. And so I wrote this book about what it was to be a Southern man, investigating if they still exist in New Zealand, if it's just some sort of marketing campaign that was dreamt up by this beer company that is based in the south, in Dunedin, and where the Southern man might be today. And then I guess we published it and I forgot about it. And then recently it has been funded by the same guys who made a play out of the Helen Clark Young Lover book to do a theatrical adaptation of Richard Meros' Salutes the Southern Man. So that should be in New Zealand, maybe Australia next year. And it's sort of brought back some of the ideas of the book. And I've been talking to Arthur Meek and Jeff Pinfield, who are the team who did the first play and who are doing this. And we've begun to talk about the same concepts again. And I'm starting to think about the idea of, I don't know if in Australia they have it, but in New Zealand we have a type of butter called semi-soft butter. And I kind of think of softness as also a really fantastic thing. And I do love softness as much as hardness. And that's just, a tension that we have to work out in our lives between being hard to the world and being soft to it. And I don't think that we are hedgehogs. I think we can focus on our quills at some points and be very quilly. I guess they're writing instruments as well, aren't they? Quills. I intentionally chose a hedgehog because the quill is a writing instrument. Of course, that's not the first time I've thought of that. You can dip their quills. Yeah, okay. There is definitely a space for softness, and so I think that compromise might be something to do with being semi-soft, being ready for use when it's required, but still maintaining some hardness in the fridge, which is New Zealand. It's just a big refrigerator. I love criticism. It's so great. In the same sense that a play is an adaptation, an extension of your work, or one's work, or my work, I love reviews, even if they're obviously been written the night before a deadline. I think a lot, even in my work itself, it is a form of criticism, and it is often like folding back on itself and reviewing itself within its own text. But these silly meta levels, but silly, what do they call it, metafiction or something? I'd never heard of that. It's almost like Metamucil, just makes you run. And I just really am happy that people spend time reading it and responding critically. I guess I would be angry if anyone ever wrote anything silly, or if they didn't understand anything, or if maybe I'd be angry, I don't know. But I really enjoy people borrowing from what I've written and taking off some esoteric leaf from the page and running with that, and having that being the thing that interests them or impresses them, or makes them read some other book or something like that. I love the whole process. In terms of success, it is nice to have people aware of something. If you're wanting to say, oh, I write books, and then you can say something and they say, oh yes, I've heard of that book, and then you can maybe undo a button and look at them longingly in the eyes or something like that. I don't know the use of writing other than that. Success. That's one of the puns in Beggars and Choosers. To suck on the cesspool. And I think it gets a little filthier from there. I don't think Meros is really successful, and I think he'll be shed as a character at some stage. He'll be killed, and obviously resurrected, like Jesus, and like anyone who deserves to come back.
Like Che.
Like Che Guevara, yeah, like Elvis Presley. It's all resurrection.